Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 23, the Circulatory System. We're currently talking about how hearts are made. There are 4 different versions of hearts depending on how many chambers they have, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We talked about one-chamber hearts, which you find in basically the simplest of hearts. You find those in worms. We move on from a one-chamber heart to a two-chamber heart. That's more complicated, still quite simple. We find those in fish. The critical thing about the two-chamber heart is that there are 2 sets of capillaries that the blood goes through before it makes it back to the heart. Move on from a two-chamber heart to a three-chamber heart. Three-chamber heart. Now we've got 2 ways in and 1 way out. The 1 way out takes blood that is deoxygenated from the body and oxygenated from the lungs, and then sends that blood kind of mixes in the 1 chamber at the bottom, and then gets sent back out both directions. Some of it goes to the lungs to get oxygenated, and some goes to the body to use the oxygen. There does seem to be some mixing. The mixing isn't quite as bad as it seems. Reptiles and amphibians have 3-chamber hearts. Some amphibians have semi-divided hearts, which means there's not a specific wall between the 2 sides, but there is a groove. And rather not a groove, but a ridge. There's a bit of a ridge in the heart, so that when the heart actually goes to pump, that little ridge kind of half seals the left side against the right side, so that there's less mixing than it seems. We move on from a 3-chamber heart to a 4-chamber heart, and 4-chamber heart is the most efficient. 4-chamber heart is what birds and mammals have. There are 2 ways in and 2 ways out, and there's no mixing between oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. And what this does is it makes it so that the heart is way more efficient. What is the one thing that birds and mammals have in common? They're both endotherms. And because we're both endotherms, we both have very high oxygen requirements. And because we have very high oxygen requirements, it means that we need a really efficient heart with no wasted space, with no wasted time, with no wasted motions. And that is that when the blood goes to the lungs, it gets oxygenated. I now want to send that back out to the body without mixing any deoxygenated blood in it. So here we see a 4-chamber heart. Deoxygenated blood comes in on the right side, comes to the right atrium. The right atrium sends blood down to the right ventricle. The right ventricle, notice the very obvious wall. The right ventricle sends blood to the lungs where it picks up oxygen. This now oxygenated blood comes back to the heart on the left side, comes into the left atrium. The left atrium sends it down to the left ventricle. The left ventricle then sends it out to the body. And now we have our 2 complete circuits, and we have no mixing between deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. A couple things I want to talk about before I go on. The first thing that I want to talk about is that when you look at a heart, I've been pointing left and right, and you may have noticed I was pointing at it backwards. You have to understand that we refer to the left and right sides of the heart based on the owner of the heart, not the viewer. This is my heart. This is my left side, so this is the left side of the heart. This is my right side, so this is the right side of the heart. It is left and right of the owner of the heart, not of the viewer of the heart. Blood flow goes through the way it comes into the heart on that right atrium. Atrium is the way in for the heart. Ventricle is the way out. The right atrium receives blood from 3 vessels. The superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and then the coronary sinus. But don't worry about the coronary sinus. There are 2 big veins. One big vein drains basically the top part of the body down into the heart, and this other vein, the superior vena cava. And then this other vein, called the inferior vena cava, we say drains the whole rest of the body and takes all of that blood. So these 2 very large veins, and to be fair, they're about the size of your thumb. They're very big. These 2 large veins lead into the right atrium of your heart. This deoxygenated blood coming from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava come into the right atrium. The right atrium sends it down to the right ventricle. When the ventricles contract, the right ventricle sends blood out what's called the pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary means lungs, so the artery that goes to the lungs. The right atrium sends blood to the pulmonary trunk, which splits really quick into the left and right pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries are the arteries that take blood to the lungs. Remember, we're taking deoxygenated blood to the lungs. It's an artery that's carrying blood without oxygen in it. But it makes sense because this is the artery that's taking blood to the lungs. And what's going to happen to the blood in the lungs? It's going to pick up oxygen. This now good oxygenated blood is going to come back to the heart by the pulmonary veins. Remember, veins bring blood back to the heart. The pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood to the left atrium. The left atrium sends this good blood down to the left ventricle, and the left ventricle will send blood out to the body by a very large artery called the aorta, again, about the size of your thumb. You could literally stick your thumb in the aorta. When you think of blood vessels, do you think of something as big as your thumb? No, you think of things like maybe a big one's the size of a pencil. No, not your thumb. The aorta then is going to carry blood to the entire body. So, we just said all of these things. All right, so let's look at this a lot more detailed and more anatomically correct version of a heart. All right, we've got two circuits. That's what this is showing up here. The yellow circuit is the pulmonary circuit, and the green is the systemic. This is going up to the brain. This is coming down to the body, and the yellow is going to the lungs. So, used blood from the brain, from the body, come to the heart at the right atrium. This vein coming down right here, that is that superior vena cava. This vein right here coming up from the bottom is the inferior vena cava. Used blood comes into the heart on the right atrium. The right atrium sends it down to the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then send the blood by the pulmonary arteries, the left and right pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. And I know they're arteries and they're blue, but again, they're sending blood to the lungs, so what's going to happen to the blood once it gets there? It's going to get oxygen. The lungs is where the blood gets oxygenated, and then the lungs will send this now fresh oxygenated blood back to the heart on the left atrium. The pulmonary veins bring good blood back to the heart in the left atrium. The left atrium sends blood down to the left ventricle. The left ventricle sends blood out to the body by this right here. This vessel is the aorta. It's the largest vessel you have in your body, strongest vessel you have in your body. This is the flow of the blood through the body. This is the systemic circuit here. This is the pulmonary circuit here. To the body, to the lungs. Any questions? Blood is what the heart pumps. Your blood is made inside your red marrow. It's made inside your red bone marrow. Your red marrow, you've heard of bone marrow. There's two kinds of bone marrow. There's red and yellow. Yellow marrow stores fat. Red marrow specifically is for making blood. When you're young, kids all the way up into late teens, you've got red marrow in the heads of your long bones, like your shoulder bone, or like your arm bone, your leg bones, stuff like that. And in your flat bones. Your flat bones are like your ribs and your sternum and things like that, and your hips. The older you get, the less red marrow you have. It's very common for elderly people to be anemic, which means they don't have enough blood. And that's because the older you get, the more of this red marrow dies. Until what you get to be about retirement age, pretty much all you have left is red marrow just in your sternum and in your ribs. You don't have really red marrow left anywhere else. Your blood is made in your bones. Your blood is made in your bones. Your blood is made in your bones. And your blood is made of two basic things. It's made of plasma, which is the liquid, and then the cells. There are a few different cells, and the cells are red blood cells, white blood cells, and then platelets. It's a bit of a stretch to call a platelet a cell, but they're pieces of cells. So again, blood's made of two things, the liquid, called plasma, and the cells, red, white, and platelets. Your blood is about 55% liquid, and about 45% cells, give or take. The actual liquid of the blood is not red. The liquid of the blood is kind of like a clear yellow, clear straw yellow. It's only red because of red blood cells. We know about blood types. We talked about blood types in Biology 1. There are 4 basic blood types, A, B, O, and AB. Remember, we talked about blood typing way back when. Type A is dominant over O, type B is dominant over O, but A and B aren't dominant over each other. So if I get an A gene from mom and an O gene from dad, I'm going to have type A blood. If I get a B gene from dad and an O gene from mom, I'm going to have type B blood. But if I get an A gene from mom and a B gene from dad, I'm going to have type AB blood. The only way to have type O is to have two O genes, O from mom and O from dad. You've probably heard of positive and negative. Remember that A and B means I've got the A-type molecule on the surface of my red blood cells. Just kind of imagine it like a little flag with an A on it. Or I've got the B-type molecule on my cell surface. Just imagine a little B on a flag. If you have type O, it means you don't have either of those flags. That's what O means. O means nothing, no flag. If I have type A, I've got the A flag. If I have the type B, I've got the B flag. If I have type AB, I don't have a flag with A and B on it. I have A flags and B flags on my red blood cells. O positive, A positive, B negative. The positive and negative, it's just another flag. This flag is called the Rh flag or the Rh factor. And the Rh factor is, there are several different varieties. It's not terribly important for most people which variety of Rh factor you have. It's just, do you have it or not? If you do have it, you're Rh positive, and if you don't have it, you're Rh negative. And about 85% of people are Rh positive, only about 15% are Rh negative. And for the average person, that never matters. The only time it matters is if you're receiving blood, and then it only really matters if you're Rh negative. So for 15% of people, it matters whether they're positive or negative, and then only then if they're receiving blood.